Everyone. Oh, there we are. Yeah, hi everyone. We're a small group, so hi Randall, James, Jenna, Cheryl, PJ, and Emily. Thanks for popping along today. I'm sort of not really going to talk about necessarily in detail about why kind of exercise matters, but we can talk about that. But I was just going to talk about some of the projects that I'm involved in at the moment. So my name is, I've got a couple of slides, so I'll share screen in a moment, but so I'm Jo Hudson. I'm actually a sport and exercise psychologist. I'm in the School of Exercise Sciences and also part of Arwin, so I'm seconded onto Arwin. And I'm in the health and wellbeing cluster. I'm an associate professor there in the school, but the exciting stuff I do is with Arwin. So I just need to open my PowerPoint. It's a good, yesterday I had like three important, three presentation-y type things and interviews, and our Wi-Fi was just going bonkers. So it's much better today, so it's good timing. Okay, so that's me. Why my research matters, just to set the scene to start with. So I focus on physical activity in older adults and exercise in older adults. If you're not aware, the population is aging, and there are more and more of us that are living to a riper old age, which is great news in one respect. But obviously, if we're not living a healthy old age, then that's a bit of a challenge for individuals and for society in lots of different ways. And one of the things that helps us to age healthily is to be active. So, you know, we're all actually living the experience of a drastic impact on our activity and sedentary behaviour in the middle of COVID. And we've got lots of data now that link health and to physical activity and reducing your sedentary time. But what we do know about the older population is that they are much more likely to be inactive and also sedentary. This is just a visualization of activity levels across different age groups, just to illustrate that. Sedentary behavior is obviously slightly different, but the pattern is the same there. Older adults are very sedentary. What we also know is that people who are aged over 50 and older than that do report feeling often lonely, and this has increased. And this has increased with COVID as well. And this is projected to increase even more. And why am I sort of raising loneliness? Well, because we do know that loneliness is linked to a lot of negative health outcomes: self-reported chronic disease, high cholesterol, depression, smoking, and physical inactivity. So there's a relationship there that we can start to work on to try and increase people's health, but also increase or decrease their levels of loneliness by increasing physical activity. So the kind of work that I do really focuses on the psychosocial aspects of exercise. So obviously, as a psychologist, I don't really look at the physiological aspects of exercise. That's what my colleagues do. And essentially, there are two key questions that underpin the research that I'm involved in. How can we increase physical activity and reduce sedentary behaviour? So some of that is using behaviour change techniques, some of it using technology, which I'll come on to shortly. And how can we, through this increase in physical activity and sedentary behaviour, how can we enhance quality and meaning of life to people? So it's much more than about just getting people moving. It's about getting people to engage in much more purposeful lives as we grow older. So these are some of the kind of partners that I'm working with, and these are just some examples of some of the projects or some of the kind of key ideas that we're looking at in the projects that are going on at the moment. So looking at older adults, activity barriers, and particularly that's focusing in one study on the life transitions that we experience and how those are related to our levels of physical activity and how we cope with changes in physical activity. We're also carrying out some research looking at interventions to increase physical activity. Some of these are behaviour change interventions. So typical examples of those might be self-monitoring, using things like Fitbits or step counters, and goal setting, information, social support. We've got projects looking at intergenerational technology, so pairing together parents and grandchildren with a technological sort of, it's basically a world walking interface where they can walk around Wales, they can walk around the world, and the idea is to kind of stimulate exercise. That's been quite massively impacted by COVID. Excuse me. And then we've got some other projects that are going on at the moment, looking at building communities and identities through physical activity. So empowering older adults to take charge of their own physical activity, environment to generate supportive communities that will stimulate and support physical activity. And we specifically, as part of that project, looking at how that's helping people to change and develop a more physically active identity and build into meaning of life. And then the Cherish project that we're doing at the moment is a co-designed digital movement diary with older adults. So there's a very sort of technological side of that, and we're trying to translate that into something that older adults will find appealing. The final project then to mention is something that's going to be started soon, and this is looking at how we can optimise our home spaces to increase older adults' physical activity. And obviously we're all spending a lot more time at home at the moment, and there's the home space idea is something that's been worked on a lot with children, and Gareth Stratton, one of the co-researchers on this project, has done lots of work with children using this idea of trying to work out what people's home spaces are like, and then how we can change those or use them to optimize our physical activity. And it's not just always about sitting in front of, standing or exercising in front of a video or a computer and doing online exercise. So we're keen to see whether or not we can extend that into the older adult world, so that older adults who are at home more, but also some older adults who will be a little bit more fearful about going outside can exercise and be physically active at home, reduce their sedentary behaviour, and then hopefully increase their independence so that they can get out and about in the communities and make a difference. So that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about my research. So I think now it's over to if there are any questions or conversations that anybody wants to have about that.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Mark.
I'll ask a question. Do you do anything with peer-led stuff? Like peer-to-peer? Because I used to work for Age Concern, and we did
a
project. We also did the senior health mentors. So the idea was you get skill up people with certain knowledge, and then they act like because people are more like to be inspired and listen to their peers than necessary health professionals or in young. Sometimes a peer-led approach. I just wonder whether that's something that you've looked into.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually part of a part of this building communities and changing identities idea. So that's a project with Bridgend Council, and they've got a scheme called Super Ages, and that's funded by the Healthy and Active Fund, and as part of that, we're doing, so that's going to be evaluated, and we're doing the kind of the research arm of that, and part of that, the ethos of that is very much what you're talking about there. So training up older adults so that they can lead lead their communities in being physically active, come up with initiatives that actually will work for them, that are designed by and led by the older adults. And so there'll be kind of this is not the late sorry, hold on. I've been doing lots of talking lately. So this is not the label that they've got, but they would be kind of, champions and community leaders. And the idea is that it's coming from this notion of empowerment, but also as, mentors and older adults as mentors for other older adults. So that kind of peer leadership. And the idea is that it will roll out a program that's sustainable in the long term. So that's been hit by COVID as well, obviously. So a lot of the work is going online, but people are keen to get out and about when they can. So yeah, so that idea is incorporated into that project, very much from an empowerment perspective. People being able to take charge of their own sort of decisions, and construct opportunities within their community to try and you know, enable them to do what they want to do, to be more active. And what we're doing there is we're really looking at it from an in-depth personal narrative perspective. So Bridget and Council were really keen to try and find out about some sort of personal stories, so they can get like the overall picture, but they wanted us to use some of our qualitative methodology to try and really drill down into what the individual experience is, and what's life-changing for different individuals. So we're just collecting the data for that, actually. So I don't have any results on that. But yeah, thanks. Good question.
All right. I could ask other questions. I'll be quiet for a bit.
That's okay. Yeah, I don't know whether anybody's, if anybody's got any thoughts. They don't have to be questions, but
I had one thought.
Yeah.
Just think about now, the times that they are now, and since I've been in my 30s, I just feel like people of my age, so 30s, 40s, everybody's doing an Ironman, everybody's doing some sort of cycling, running, you know, it's like everybody is taking it up. And I wonder if that will have an effect on the older adults that will come. Will they still be active? Will there be injuries that people will be carrying because of all of the stuff that they've been doing in their younger years? And, you know, I wonder, because like in the times when my mum, who's in her early 70s, who's quite inactive and has been for most of her life, you know, throughout her life, she hasn't had these sort of patterns of everybody doing something. And I do feel like it is, it's the thing to do now, you know, it's fashionable almost.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's a couple of points there, Ellie. I think I would agree with you that, you know, the demographic of, you know, society demographics are changing, aren't they, all the time. And so even what we consider as an older person is changed. And actually, you know, what is old is kind of, it's a social construct, isn't it? So, and that the age is kind of gradually going up and up and up, really. And so people have got the opportunity to be more active for longer. So at the moment, the older population that we've got is the least active population. How that's going to look as we go through, I think we need to, and this is not my area of expertise, but that's where people need to look at modelling to see how those kind of physical activity trends will translate into the future. I think it's so I guess so that point about will the future older adult populations be more active? Potentially, yes, because there are different opportunities and we've got a different perspective, the younger generations, a different perspective on physical activity. So when we talk to older adults, we would think nothing of going to the gym, like you say, and doing an Ironman. But for lots of older adults, you know, physical activity really needs a clear purpose. And so it's you know, and for some people it can be kind of an indulgence, and it's not kind of necessarily a valued aspect of anybody's day to just go to the gym just to be active. So there is that sort of mindset shift, so that might work. But it's a really interesting observation, and I don't have the specific broken down kind of demographic statistics here, but and this is not to kind of like refute your observation, but the population trends would say that actually physical activity levels, you know, they're not necessarily increasing perhaps at the rate that we think they are from our personal standpoint, because I guess, you know, with respect, you're coming at it from a sort of educated professional perspective, and that's, I guess, who your sort of normative group are. And so all the people that you know and that maybe you link up with on Facebook and Instagram or whatever are doing Ironmans and things like that. But then there's a whole other aspect, you know, area of the population that are not engaging in those things. And then, you know, it's so, but I'm sort of saying that from a kind of a bit of a second guessing perspective. Because like I say, the population statistics and how the different subgroups within the population will look in relation to that is not my area of expertise. You know, it's just older adults. So, but I do think it's an interesting one, and actually for me, the sort of the middle-aged group, the 50 plus, are a really important group because they're somewhere in between. And so I think trying to change behavior at that age group so that when they become older people, that, you know, that they are engaged in some physical activity.
Yeah.
Is it different? Oh, sorry, I'll let someone else.
You know, I was interested in your comments, Ellie, because I'm an adult a little bit older than 30, and I have exercised in different ways, different stages of my life, and fear of injury and actual experience of injury will change you sometime between 30 and 50, 60. You know, you get plantar fasciitis and you can't run for 6 months, and things like that will happen. And so I think what Joanne's statistics and analysis will show is that there will be people who say, oh, just forget it, and become more and more sedentary, and people who say it matters to me to stay active. I feel better when I stay active, but I have to figure out a different, less stupid way to do it.
Yeah, Randall, I think you're right, and I think that's where really my sort of notion is coming from as a researcher, in that it's got to have meaning, it's got to have value, and certainly that's something. So when we're talking to older adults about life transitions, what tends to happen, not for everybody, but for those people who aren't active or who perhaps have, you know, a number of life transitions that they've not been able to cope with well. You know, that can actually sort of have a real impact on their life purpose, and any sort of meaning that their life's got. So what we tend to find is that impacts on just doing anything. And so for a lot of older adults, and I'm kind of, I guess what I'm talking about in relation to that idea are people 70 plus. You know, so it's kind of incidental activity, if you like. So it's part of just living, you know, going shopping, doing your household chores, maybe caring for somebody else, maybe going to see a friend. But then when all those kind of things are sort of removed from your life, or when there are major changes, like just for example, moving location to a smaller house, downsizing, getting rid of some of your possessions and things, it sort of changes just what you need to do. So there is that kind of, I'm sort of digressing a little bit there, but the sort of the meaning of physical activity is really important, I think, like Randall says, and encouraging people to find something that helps them as an individual and helps to enhance their well-being through being physically active and not as sedentary is part of the key. But that's so variable across individuals, that some of our kind of generic behavior change strategies and so on, just they don't work for everybody, and also they don't work with different age groups necessarily. So a lot of what's kind of would work with younger people doesn't always work with older people. So you know, that's why, for example, Mark's comment about the peer mentorship and, you know, realistic and relatable role models are important.
Yeah, because in terms of resilience and adaptability as you get older, that's a good point about injury and all those sort of things. Your experience only ever run, and then suddenly you can't run, and unless you can think of something else to do, or you have the resources to buy equipment that help running become, you know, like a treadmill or whatever. So some of this is socioeconomic, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And educational in terms of exposure to different types of sport throughout your life, and also the headspace to think, what sport should I take up now when you've got, you know, huge number of things going on in your life. I was wondering whether, in terms of your research, Jo, and going into and using the living lab space in our institute, filling it, you know, at the moment it's quite a clean room with, you know, clean lines, and we're about to fill it with kettles and household items at some point, we almost need to simulate an environment that is represented by people that don't have large spaces, and really clog it up with stuff and make it a bit more realistic to the average person, to the kind of person that is going to feed the statistics and become immobile as they get older, or not. I think it's an opportunity to simulate that. But yeah, but the experience is vastly different for different people as they get older, and that's another thing I was interested about the numbers. Was we look at those numbers at 80 going down, mobility and all that sort of stuff, and some of that's you automatically assume it's correlating with age, but obviously that's a different generation of people at 80 than it is at 50. So those 50-year-olds might not be the immobile, their attitude to exercise might be different, or the 35-year-olds and the 40-year-olds that are really active now are maybe drinking too much, so they may not get to 80 anyway. There's lots going on, isn't there, with those charts. And COVID is responsible probably for increase of exercise and increase of alcohol, for example. So there's lots to consider.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're interested in those transitions as well, is because how we navigate transitions, and transitions, life is all about change, isn't it? And so how we navigate those different transitions is kind of really important. That's what we think anyway, in terms of how people see their change in self, how they see their changes in identity, and how that sort of links in with changes in their life purpose and their life meaning, and then how that translates into behavior and how they live life, whether it's active or not. There's another project that we're doing we're just collecting pilot data, and it's looking at what people think of as old, and how people would describe older people, and the kind of how people would describe a healthy older adulthood. And so we're getting some really interesting data from there. And one of the things that we're interested in is finding more out about people's narratives about older adults, and their projected older adulthood, because there's some recent research that's looked at the discourse in societal sort of publications around older adults. And unfortunately, it's kind of getting worse and worse. So there's like a decline in the way that we're talking about older adults. And these researchers, Ngan Chow it was, did a massive study. I think they looked at about 6 million words across newspapers, magazines, books, and things in the 1800s, the 1900s, and looked at what kinds of words are used, and what are the themes that are used when we're discussing older adults. And actually, in the more recent sort of times, it's got more and more negative. So it's more about sort of decline, frailty, vulnerability. And Centre for Aging Better has actually done a similar recent study of kind of political discourse and advertisers' discourse and so on, around how older adults are talked about. And it's very much about like care and frail and vulnerability, and sort of negative connotations really, and seeing age as a barrier. And I guess that's kind of what we're trying to look into. How do we change that? How do we change that at an individual level? How do we change people's personal kind of narratives? And especially when they're surrounded by, if I've kind of started talking about things that are just not making sense, talking about narratives and so on, just let me know. But how do we actually change people's personal story? And actually through physical activity, we think that we can contribute to that.
So is there anything we don't talk about more negatively now than we did previously? I mean, can you adjust this for the background noise of just how negative our entire discourse is?
Oh, you mean because of COVID?
Well, I mean, point your fingers to whatever you want to. I'll point at social media and say, there is a lot more negativity in my life because I let myself look at Facebook every day.
Yeah. I think I'd have to see what other people's thoughts are on that, because to be honest, I would agree with you sort of anecdotally. I've got to say, I'm not actually a social media person, and that's partly one of the reasons why. So I don't really go on social media. I don't know what the research says all about that, but I think you're probably right. I only know kind of the evidence in relation to discourse around older adults. But yeah, I guess political discourse, health discourse, it is quite negative. It's not great, is it? Yeah.
Well, bless you for staying off social media. You're smart.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. But yeah, I don't know if other people, what your research is all about. And
I think personally on social media, you're not meant to age. I think that's the thing, you're meant to filter yourself, and you're just not meant to age at all.
oh, Mark, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I can't believe I'm still doing that after a year. all I was going to say is just don't ever change your profile picture on Facebook, and then you just feel young every time.
Yeah.
And there's just when they see you in real life.
Jen, I think, and that's I think you're spot on, aren't you? And yeah, I think that's, if you look at some of the,
I think media's got a lot to do with it. Just they're quite negative about people, and yeah, you expect it just to filter yourself and stay young, and there's no, why doesn't people grow old gracefully, and that kind of attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of valuing older people, and older people being able to value themselves, and that's part of the story, isn't it? I mean, if you look at a lot of the Centre for Aging Better literature and the publications that they produce, there are some really kind of positive actions going on. So for example, one of the things that they've come up with is, so we've all seen that sign, when it's to sort of warn you that there might be older people crossing the road and they're like really hunched over. Well, some people, they just want a competition, and so they've come up with loads of alternative icons. So it's like two older people dancing across the road. And so it's just subtle things like that I think are really important. I mean, that I'm not looking at that now. It's something that I think is really important to have a look at, and how those kinds of messages, particularly in sort of health publications and so on. Like I've got a graphic, and I do this with my students. I've got a graphic an infographic that I show students, and it's all the chronic diseases that older adults tend to have. And it's kind of like, it's great, but we don't have a graphic with all the positive attributes of being an older adult, do we? So I think there's part of that kind of societal narrative, like you said, but it actually does start really early, Jenna. I think you're absolutely right. And and we embody, so stereotype embodiment theory suggests that we start to embody, or we're bombarded with these kind of stereotype messages about different people and different groups of people. And we start to embody the stereotypes that we hear about older adults. So as we grow older, we'll start to sort of accept and adopt some of those stereotyped views for ourselves. And some of those sort of stereotype views of what's beautiful and what's not beautiful as well. So, which then kind of become conflicting, don't they? Yeah, but I have to say, I can't talk with any expertise on social media.
I mean, in terms of the Owen Institute, the whole premise of the project is that there's this massive demand, silver economy, longevity, dividend, all these things, way of describing it, which amounts to market failure in terms of, as I've talked to before, about the fact that there's huge amounts of demand, huge amounts of money, and yet the supply is not there. And our other sort of area is creative industries, and that's one of the most ageist industries there are, and it's been loads of research in terms of how much money they could make out of it, and so it's a bit of a no-brainer. But then you look around for all the images of older people online, trying to find positive images. It's hard enough just generally Googling it. So for them to find some, to have images, ready-made images that they can use to promote their products and services is really hard. It's so that's one of the things, that the challenges that we have, is to change their opinion about the value of doing this, and then helping them actually achieve that by coming up with new ways of marketing. We've just subscribed to get to a whole bank of new photos, but we also need to produce our own photos and just basically give industry the tools they need to actually take advantage of this market. Because I think just saying, oh, there's loads of money there available is one thing, but I think if they're pushing against society and they've also in essence ageist in themselves, they don't even value the market itself. So I think it's still a big challenge. If it wasn't a big challenge, they'd already be doing it, wouldn't they? So and taking advantage of things. So we've still got that, changing that sort of changing their mindset is going to be an ongoing battle. That's why we need to get people into the space, and show them what can be done. And that's the other thing about also creating things that aren't just for older people. The whole thing is universal design. So you create something that's useful for someone. If you create something that's useful for someone to handle and ergonomically efficient and also aesthetically pleasing and satisfying, if you get something like that for a 75-year-old, it'll be just as good for a 25-year-old. So it's I think that's another change of way of thinking, that products for older people need to be beige and medical. Obviously, that's another massive thing to overcome.
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny that you mentioned advertising, because I did a lot of work in insurance advertising prior to coming to Swansea, and I assure you there are plenty of images of older people having fun and playing with their grandchildren and riding bicycles on the beach that get used in insurance advertising. So the stock photos are there. It's a matter of how often you see them and how they're used to target people.
So though, if you notice them, they're often like disproportionately. It's not like everyday stuff. Often, isn't, like you say, it's people. It's either like wacky swimming hat type things on the beach, or it's either really depressing. It just doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground. If you look at a lot of advertising for, I guess it depends on the industry as well, doesn't it? Things like insurance and stuff. It's people having a great time on a beach, showing them what they can afford. Potentially, if they had more money. But yeah, so what do you think the challenge is then in that regard?
I think that was for you, Randall.
You don't think there's a challenge in terms of the imagery being used?
I'm saying that the imagery is out there for those who are smart about using it in advertising, but I don't disagree with your point about the overall imagery and what we see.
Yeah.
I mean, what you see in news reports about the elderly is different than insurance stock photographs of riding bicycles on the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a presentation yesterday, and I was thinking about sort of what positive media messages we see of older adults, and I was just thinking about your idea, Mark, of like extremes, and so people were putting in the chat things like, a 100-woman-year-old. So I said, what positive messages? So we've all seen obviously Captain Tom, and then people were putting things in the chat, which were totally, great sort of suggestions. So a 100-year-old woman who'd been skydiving, a 98-year-old kind of surfer, or that kind of thing. And I don't know what people feel about those kinds of images. I think they're really positive, but they're very extreme, aren't they? So not many 100-year-olds are going to be doing that. So I don't know what you feel in terms of the kinds of messages that we might be sending out as a society when that's our representation. It's either, sitting at home or kind of like out skydiving.
It's funny because my mother is 87 years old. She's at home. She has emphysema. She has not left her house in well over a year and has pretty much decided that there is no reason she's ever going to leave her house again. But she is one of the happiest people I know. She lies there on an adjustable bed and watches travel shows on television and movies, and someone comes in every day and spends time with her, and she gets up and moves around some, not very much, but but yeah, she's not filled up with worries about a lot of things, and I think in terms of just sort of well-being and feeling good about your life, that it would be hard to make a news story or a good photograph out of that, but she knows how to find happiness.
Yeah. That,
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, I think that's a really, really interesting point, isn't it? And that's one of the dangers in all this, isn't it? That we assume that everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to have a fulfilled life, but it looks very different to different types of people.
Yeah, definitely, and I think, and that's part of I think that's part of why I hope that I'm kind of skydiving or whatever when I'm 100. Running's my thing, so I hope I'm still running when I'm 100. But just sending that message is not quite right, is it? So it's what's right for that individual. And so for your mum, Randall, that small amount of activity, that's probably enough. But I think also what you just so her watching travel shows, that strikes me, because that's maybe where we can come in with the Arwen Institute to think about, those people who actually can't travel outside their houses and so on. How can we bring the outside world into them? And I know there's virtual reality and people are doing it, and there is some research around that. And there is research around people being in virtual environments, or it is obviously helpful for well-being and so on. So that's maybe something that we perhaps need to look at, isn't it?
Yeah.
A little bit more, because there's obviously a reason why she's watching the travel shows as opposed to like cooking shows or whatever.
Yeah, I think often it comes down to choice, isn't it? And that strikes me, that if your mother's happy, it's because she's chosen that environment at the moment that she's happy with. It's when the choice is taken away from you, isn't it? And that's why COVID's so depressing for a lot of people that would choose to be outside if they could. Because it strikes me, if you were in space as an astronaut, you'd spend huge amounts of time, although you'd have a nice view, you would spend a huge amount of time in a confined space, like people in COVID. But a lot of people are really, really depressed. I know a lot of people that are finding really, really struggling, even though they can go out for exercise, but just the very fact that their lives are constrained and they don't have any choice about it. That's the main thing, isn't it? It's giving people, trying to give people as much choice to lead as varied a life as they want to lead, and giving them the opportunities. And that's what probably where the lack of services and products and things like that people have takes away that choice that they maybe had throughout the rest of their life. They suddenly feel like stuff's not geared towards them, or the society's pushing against them, and suddenly that they feel like life's not as good anymore. And they don't see people like themselves represented in the media and everything else. It just compounds itself. And the other thing I was going to say is about virtual reality. Another option aside from watching travel programs would be like virtual reality, wasn't it? Putting on a headset and meeting people. I'd like to do this at any point in my life, but meeting virtual avatars of someone else, your family members from the other side of the world, meeting on some kind of virtual beach somewhere or something like that. I think it's not done enough. It's possible, isn't it, now? So I think we should do more. Let's do more of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, I think that's been a brilliant talk. I really enjoyed listening to you, Joe, and to everybody else's discussion afterwards. I think I'm just going to click stop on here now, and